In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make continuous bias tape or continuous bias binding from a square of fabric. So why do you want bias tape or bias binding versus straight edge binding? So straight edge binding, which was another video, is really easy. You just cut straight lines parallel, hook them together, and you make binding. And it's straight because you're cutting straight along the threads in your fabric. So this is the grain line, the threads are going this way. Cross grain, the threads are going this way, across the threads on the grain. Bias, you're cutting on a 45-degree angle, and this gives your fabric a little bit more give and stretch so that you can do curves. So if you're doing a project like this that is round or has any kind of a curve, you're going to want the binding to have been cut on the bias so that it gives you a really nice curve. Now, if you're doing a straight project like this, you can use straight edge or you can use bias binding. You can always use bias binding. You can't always use straight edge binding. That is important to remember. So let's make some bias binding. When you make it out of a square, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to cut on the bias, which is really easy to figure out because you're just going to cut on the diagonal from corner to corner. Now we are going to put these together and we're going to sew our first 1/4 inch seam. So you're going to take opposite sides. So either this side to this side or this side to this side, does not matter which. And I am going to flip it to the right since I am right-handed and I want to pin from the right. So this bottom one, I'm going to line up on my grid. And then I'm going to make sure that point is at a little cross spot. We need this corner to be a 1/4 inch up from that point so that when we sew this together, everything is lined up properly and we get a beautiful parallelogram. So I'm going to pin that. I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam there and press those seams open. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to draw our lines on here. As much as I often profess my love for pens that erase when heated, we cannot use them on this because we're going to be sewing these two sides together and we're going to have to press that seam open, and we don't want our lines to go away because we need them as guides for cutting. So I'm going to be making a 2.5 inch bias binding for a quilted project. So I'm just going to start from one of these longer sides, top or bottom, whichever you prefer. And then you're going to draw lines at 2.5 inch increments. I am just going to be using a regular pen. I did try chalk one time, thinking that, oh, I shouldn't use a regular pen on my fabric. But from moving the ruler and putting it together to pin and then pressing, I lost most of my chalk line as well. So you need a line that's going to stay. You just want to make sure you don't use a pen that's going to bleed through to the front of your fabric. Pick something that you can see and that is going to work. Now, usually when you get to your opposite side, you're not going to have an exact amount that you need. So instead of drawing that last line, you're just going to trim off the excess. So make sure the whole top is on your mat. Line that up just like you're going to draw it and trim off that little bit of extra. Now, we're going to turn this right side up because we need to pin it right sides together and get these lines lined up. But we're not going to do it like this. While it lines up, you don't have anywhere to cut from. So you're going to off-center this a little bit. So this is what our goal is going to be, so that when it's sewn together, these lines are lined up. But you can't just line them up right this second. Let me show you how to do that. All right, so we have to get these lined up so that the lines are lined up, but a 1/4 inch down from that raw edge. That is the trick. And this raw edge is going to line up with the first line. Okay, that's super important and an area that I find some videos to be a little bit confusing. So I don't start here, I start with this first line in. And what I do is I take a pin and I put it in through the line about a 1/4 inch down. Now I need to put it here with this line. So I'm going to pick this up. I'm going to go down about a 1/4 inch and I'm going to put that through right there. So it's not lined up perfectly, right? But I'm just making sure I'm on the line a 1/4 inch down from the raw edge. I'm going to leave that pin in there. And then I'm going to pivot my fabric so that those raw edges are lined up. And I'm going to take that pin out and I'm going to do it straight. Now I'm going to move down here. I'm going to do it a 1/4 inch down from that corner there. And this corner is going to be, it should be offset by a 1/4 inch from that line. And actually, let me just draw that so you can really understand what I'm talking about. It's hard to show when it's two sides. Okay, so say this is our raw edge, right? So this is, the line is going to be like this, and then over here, going to be like this. So there's going to be a 1/4 inch between those two lines there. All right, it looks really weird and floppy and funny. So I'm just going to take this to my machine and I'm going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam here, and I'm going to press that open just like I did this, and I will be right back. Now we have a tube and we have our lines and they're beautifully lined up. So now you're just going to grab your scissors and you're going to cut along this line. And as you spin it around, we're going to end up with one big piece of continuous bias. Now you're going to decide if you're going to make bias tape or bias quilt binding. You will notice after you cut it, you're going to have this weird triangle on the end. So you're just going to trim that off. We need it to be nice and straight so we can make our bias tape. These are bias tape makers. They save you time because we're going to thread the fabric through and it is going to automatically fold both of these edges in evenly to the center and press it all at the same time, instead of having to fold it in half and then fold one in and then fold the other one in. So when these sizes are correct, definitely want to use them. They're not a huge investment. And the size that your bias tape will be is whatever is on the tip of this maker. So this is a 2.5 inch strip. So we're going to be using the bigger one. You're going to just put it into that channel with the wrong side up. And mine came with this little awl so that you can help push it through. Actually, let me turn this the opposite way. And then you're going to make sure you have it feeding pretty evenly and get that tip out and get it started. So you're just going to take your iron and then you're just going to move along as you move this back, and see how it just sets it up so that those raw edges are perfectly together. Now our bias tape is all pressed. A couple things to note. You want to make sure when you hit these seams that they stay open. Sometimes as they're going through this, they'll fold like this. So just double check, oh, like that one. So just double check and make sure that they are staying open, because that's going to give you your best finish when you're using this bias tape. Now, if you want to make this a little bit crisper, you can use a spray starch and spray your fabric before you're putting it through your bias tape maker. So that's another tip. And then save those toilet paper rolls. This is a great way to store your bias tape or bias quilt binding when you're not ready to use it. If you want it to take up less space, you could cut this toilet paper roll in half and then just stack it more and it would be shorter. Now, if you want to make continuous bias binding, you're going to put this right side down on your ironing board and you're going to fold it, matching these raw edges, and you're just going to press. And then you're going to be ready for any kind of quilted project, whether it is a curved edge or a straight edge. So now we have bias binding and bias tape made with the same method, just a different way of ironing that because you're going to have different application for each.